I never thought a neighborhood could make me choose between my home and my dog, but that is exactly what happened. One day, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my door, stamped with the HOA logo. Inside, in bold letters, it said, "Your dog is no longer permitted within the community." I read that line 3 times, thinking it had to be a joke. Max, my golden retriever, was the friendliest, calmest dog you could ever meet. He was like family, but to the HOA, he was now a nuisance. That was the moment I realized something ugly about my new neighborhood. They were not protecting peace. They were protecting power. When I first moved into the neighborhood, everything looked perfect. Neatly trimmed lawns, kids playing outside, and neighbors who waved every morning. It felt like the kind of place where nothing could go wrong. I had just started a new job. My wife worked from home, and our golden retriever, Max, had finally found a backyard big enough to run in. For the first few months, life was peaceful. Max loved it here, chasing squirrels, barking at the mail truck, and greeting every neighbor who passed by. Everyone adored him, especially the kids next door. He was the unofficial mascot of our little street, until the letters started coming. At first, I thought it was junk mail, a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a typed note that said, "Notice of violation, pet behavior disturbing. Your animal has been reported for creating excessive noise." I laughed. Max was loud sometimes, sure, but no more than any other dog. Still, I figured maybe someone had complained, so I decided to be polite. I wrote back to the HOA, saying I would keep Max indoors during the night and monitor his barking. That should have been the end of it, but it was only the beginning. A week later, another letter came. This one said, "Second violation. Failure to comply may result in fines or removal of the animal per Section 8C. Removal of the animal." That line made my stomach drop. Who in their right mind thinks they can just remove someone's dog? I called the HOA number listed on the notice, and a woman named Susan answered. Her tone was polite but cold, the kind of tone that sounds like she is smiling through her teeth. "Hello, this is the Maple Creek Homeowners Association." She said, "Hi, this is David Clark. I got a letter saying my dog is disturbing the neighborhood. I think there's been a mistake." She paused. "Sir, we received multiple complaints. It's our responsibility to maintain peace." I asked her what multiple meant. She replied, 2. I wanted to laugh, but I could tell she was serious. I said, "Look, I can assure you Max isn't out of control. He barks when the mail truck comes. That's it." She said, "Well, if it happens again, we may have to take further action." And that was it. No room for discussion. No proof, just a warning. Over the next few weeks, things got weird. Whenever I let Max out in the yard, I noticed blinds shifting across the street. Someone was watching. One morning, I found a note taped to my front door. It said, "Control your dog or lose it." No signature. That is when I realized this was personal. Someone in the neighborhood had it out for us. Then came the final straw. On a Friday afternoon, while I was at work, my wife called me in tears. She said an HOA officer had shown up with a notice declaring Max ineligible for residence under community rules. Apparently, they claimed his breed was not compliant, even though golden retrievers were not restricted anywhere in the bylaws. They gave her 7 days to remove him. When I got home, I read the document. It looked official. Letterhead, signature, the whole thing. But one thing caught my eye. The signature at the bottom. It was signed by Gregory Hall, HOA president. I had never met him, but I had heard the name before. A few neighbors mentioned he was strict. One even joked that he treated the HOA like his personal kingdom. Now, I understood what they meant. I knocked on my neighbor Linda's door that evening. She was an older woman who had lived there for over 20 years and knew everything about everyone. I showed her the letter. She sighed and said, "Greg's been running that HOA like a dictatorship since last year. You are not the first person he has gone after." I asked her if she thought he had a personal issue with me. She shook her head. "It is not you. It is control. He hates when people don't fall in line." That night, I barely slept. Max lay beside the bed, his tail thumping softly against the carpet, completely unaware that someone wanted him gone. I looked at him and felt this mix of anger and helplessness. The next day, I went to the HOA office. I asked to speak with Gregory Hall. The receptionist said he was in a meeting, but I could see him sitting right there through the glass wall, pretending to be busy. I walked over and knocked gently on the glass. He looked up, annoyed. I said, "I need to talk to you about these letters." He opened the door halfway and said, "Mr. Clark, you are in violation of community standards." "It is all in writing," I replied. "Show me where it says golden retrievers are banned." He smirked. It is not about the breed. It is about noise and disruption, I said. Max barely barks. He crossed his arms. Then prove it. That was the moment I realized I was dealing with a man who did not care about fairness. He cared about power. So I decided to fight back. That night, I posted a question in our neighborhood group chat asking if anyone else had been unfairly fined or warned by the HOA. Within an hour, I had 8 replies. One person said they were fined for having a flower pot too close to the sidewalk. Another said they got a warning for overgrown hedges that were trimmed 2 days earlier. It was clear Gregory was abusing his authority. So I reached out to someone who could help me level the playing field. My old college friend, Rachel. She was now an attorney specializing in property and housing law. I told her everything. She listened carefully, then said, "You know what this sounds like? HOA harassment. And trust me, they do not like it when someone knows the law better than they do." Her words gave me hope for the first time in weeks. She said, "Keep every letter, every message, every complaint. We are going to bury them in paperwork." I smiled. "You are serious," she said. "Oh, I am very serious. Let's see how Mr. Hall likes being on the other side of a violation." Rachel wasted no time. The next morning, she came to my house with a notepad, a briefcase, and that calm confidence only lawyers seem to have. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, while Max lay beside her feet, wagging his tail. She smiled down at him and said, "This is the criminal in question." I nodded. "Apparently, yes," she grinned. "Well, I can already tell he is innocent." Then she opened her briefcase and started reviewing the HOA bylaws. "All right," she said, flipping through the pages. Section 8C, Animal Behavior and Disturbance. It says any animal creating persistent nuisance or threat to safety may be subject to review, but that requires formal documentation, multiple written complaints, verification, and board approval. You got any of that? I shook my head. Nothing but letters signed by Greg himself. Rachel leaned back, tapping her pen. Then that is illegal enforcement. One person cannot unilaterally issue violations. He is acting outside his authority, I said. So what do we do? She smirked. We pushed back hard. The next day, she sent a formal legal notice to the HOA. It demanded proof of the alleged complaints, board meeting minutes regarding my case, and a copy of any vote taken to enforce Section 8C. She gave them 7 days to respond. Within 2 days, I got a call. It was Greg. His voice was colder than before. "Mr. Clark, we received your letter from that attorney friend of yours. Do you really think bringing lawyers into this is wise?" I said calmly. "I think following the law is wise. You might want to try it sometime." There was silence for a moment. Then he said, "Fine, we will see how this plays out." I could almost hear the anger simmering behind that forced politeness. Over the next week, something interesting happened. Neighbors started reaching out. Apparently, word had spread that I had brought in a lawyer, and suddenly, people who used to avoid eye contact began sharing their own stories. One man, Tom, told me he was fined for leaving his garbage cans out 15 minutes too long. Another woman got a warning for having unapproved holiday decorations, which turned out to be a small pumpkin on her porch in October. It was clear now Greg had turned the HOA into his personal power trip. Rachel came by again a few days later. "I have been reading through the bylaws," she said. "Greg has no legal standing to enforce penalties without board approval. In fact, there is a clause that could turn this entire thing around." She flipped the binder toward me and pointed. Section 3B, Abuse of Authority. It says any HOA officer who exceeds their duties can be suspended pending investigation by the board or majority homeowner vote. I blinked. "So, we can remove him." She smiled. "If we get enough signatures, yes." That night, I printed flyers. Polite but firm, they said, "Homeowners' rights matter. Meeting at the park this Saturday to discuss HOA leadership accountability." I slipped them into mailboxes up and down the street. I half expected people to ignore it, but Saturday came, and more than 30 homeowners showed up. Some looked nervous. Others were angry. Rachel stood beside me and spoke to the group. "No one is against rules," she said. "We all want safe, beautiful neighborhoods. But when one person abuses power, that is not community, that is control. And you do not have to accept it." People clapped. For the first time since this started, I felt hope. We passed around a petition demanding Greg's suspension pending review. By the end of the day, over 2/3 of the neighborhood had signed it. That night, I scanned all the signatures and sent them to the board. I also included Rachel S.'s official notice of motion, a legal document requesting a homeowner's vote to remove Greg under Section 3B. 2 days later, Greg showed up at my door again. this time without a smile. He didn't even bother pretending to be polite. You think you are clever, huh? Turning the neighborhood against me, I said calmly. I am not turning anyone. You did that yourself. He stepped closer. You have no idea what you are messing with. Rachel's voice came from behind me. She had just arrived, standing by her car in the driveway. Actually, she said, we know exactly what we are dealing with, and you might want to step back before you violate another clause, harassment of a homeowner. Greg looked at her, then back at me, and for a second, his face turned red. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off. Rachel exhaled. He is scared. That means we are close. The next few days were intense. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for Friday evening. It was supposed to be private, but by the time it started, half the neighborhood had gathered outside the community hall. Word spread fast that Greg's position was under review. Inside the room, tension filled the air. Greg sat at the front, arms crossed, glaring at me. Rachel sat beside me, flipping through documents like a pro. The vice president, Marcy, called the meeting to order. She said, we have received multiple complaints regarding procedural violations by the HOA president. Tonight, we will hear both sides. Rachel stood up. Her voice was calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is simple. The HOA cannot issue penalties without documented evidence and board approval. My client, Mr. Clark, has received multiple letters signed solely by Mr. Hall. No votes, no proof, no minutes. That is a violation of Section 3B. Greg interrupted. Those rules exist for order. If I waited for every vote, nothing would get done. Rachel turned to him. Order does not mean dictatorship. It means fairness. A murmur spread through the room. Even the board members looked uncomfortable. Then she held up the petition. These are signatures from 67 homeowners. That is a majority. According to your own bylaws, they have the right to demand a leadership change. Greg's face went pale. He looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. Marcy took a deep breath and said, we will take a vote now. Greg tried one last defense. You people have no idea how hard it is to keep this neighborhood in line. Someone shouted from the back, you find my kid for sidewalk chalk. The room broke into laughter. That was it. The vote was unanimous. Greg was officially suspended pending investigation. When it was over, Rachel and I walked out into the parking lot. People were cheering, clapping, shaking my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Rachel smiled at me. He will probably try something else, but for now, you are free, and Max gets to stay home where he belongs. I looked down at my phone. There was a new email from Greg. The subject line said, this is not over. I showed it to Rachel. She read it and said quietly, then he just made his biggest mistake yet. I thought the nightmare was finally over. With Greg suspended, the neighborhood felt lighter. Kids played outside again. Neighbors smiled, and Max became the local celebrity. People would stop during their evening walks just to pet him, saying things like, you are the reason this place is finally peaceful again. For the first time in months, I could sleep without worrying about another letter taped to my door. But peace never lasts long when power-hungry people lose control. It started with small things. Anonymous complaints about my lawn. A note saying my fence did not match community tone. And one morning, a ticket left on my windshield for unauthorized parking, except I was parked in my own driveway. Rachel reviewed everything and sighed. He is behind this. Greg still has friends on the board feeding him information. I frowned. Can we stop it? She nodded slowly. Yes, but we need to end this legally and permanently. If he is still emailing you, harassing you indirectly, or using board influence, that is grounds for a restraining order and defamation claim. That was not just law talk. It was war talk. We started gathering evidence, every letter, every note, every text. Rachel advised me to install a small camera by my porch, just in case someone tried leaving anything suspicious. 3 days later, that camera caught something shocking. It was 2:13 a.m. when I got the notification. Motion detected near my door. I checked the footage, and there he was. Greg Hall, flashlight in hand, slipping an envelope under my doormat. I called Rachel immediately. He was at my house. She replied, keep the video safe. Do not confront him. We will use this. The next morning, she filed a restraining order and attached the footage as evidence. Within 48 hours, Greg was officially barred from coming within 200 feet of my property. That same day, I got another call, this time from Marcy, the HOA vice president. She sounded shaken. Mr. Clark, we just discovered that Greg accessed HOA email accounts after his suspension. He sent messages to vendors pretending to be acting president. I could not believe it. He is still trying to run things. Yes, she said. We are calling a full board hearing next week to terminate his position completely, and we want you and your lawyer there. Rachel looked at me when I told her. Good, she said. Let us end this once and for all. The day of the hearing, the community hall was packed again. It felt like a movie. Neighbors whispering, reporters from the local papers sitting near the back, cameras rolling. Greg walked in with that same arrogant posture, but his confidence looked thinner now, like a mask starting to crack. The chairwoman opened the session. We are here to address multiple violations by former HOA President Gregory Hall, including unauthorized access, harassment, and defamation. Rachel stood up and played the video from my porch camera on a projector. You could hear gasps ripple through the room as Greg's face appeared on the screen, crouched by my doorstep. She said calmly, "This footage was taken at 2:13 a.m., days after Mr. Hall's suspension. He had no legal authority, no official business, and no right to be on my client's property. This is not leadership. This is obsession." Greg jumped to his feet. That is nonsense. I was delivering important correspondence. Rachel crossed her arms. At 2 in the morning, the board members looked horrified. One of them muttered, "This is unacceptable." Marcy spoke up. "Mr. Hall, your actions have violated multiple HOA and state laws. We will be voting to terminate your position permanently and ban you from serving on any neighborhood committee." Greg looked around, desperate. "You cannot do this. You need me. This place will fall apart without me." Someone from the back shouted, "It fell apart because of you." The entire room erupted in applause. Greg stormed out, slamming the door so hard the lights flickered. When the meeting ended, Rachel turned to me and smiled. "That is it. You are free." I looked down at Max, who was wagging his tail at the cheering crowd. "Feels like we both won," I said, but Rachel was not done yet. A few weeks later, she called me with one last surprise. "Remember that restraining order violation? Well, turns out, the judge reviewed the footage and added a personal penalty. Greg has to pay your legal fees." I laughed so hard I almost dropped the phone. "So, he ended up paying for your services." "Every penny," she said proudly. It felt poetic. The same man who had once fined me for grass length was now covering my lawyer SBO. As time passed, things truly returned to normal. The new HOA board started focusing on real community projects, park cleanups, safety patrols, even a dog-friendly event they called Paws in the Park. Rachel brought her own golden retriever, and Max ran around with him like they were old friends. People laughed, kids played, and for the first time since moving here, it felt like a real neighborhood. While we sat on a bench watching the dogs chase each other, I asked her, "Do you think there will always be people like Greg in these communities?" She smiled softly. "Yes, but there will also always be people who stand up to them. That is what keeps balance in the world." I looked at her, then at Max, rolling in the grass. "Guess I will always have someone to fight for." She nodded. "And now you know how to fight the right way." Later that evening, I stood in my yard, watching the sunset wash the houses in gold. The same houses that once felt like a cage now felt like freedom. Max barked softly beside me, looking up as if saying, "We did it." I laughed and patted his head. "Yeah, buddy, we really did." Then I looked toward Greg's old house. It had a new owner now, a young couple who waved whenever they saw me. They told me Greg moved out of state. Some say he tried to run another HOA, but no one wanted him on the board again. I guess even control has an expiration date. That night, I opened my laptop and started writing everything that had happened. Not out of anger, but out of relief. I titled the document, "HOA Banned My Dog." I brought a lawyer, and I realized something powerful. It was never just about a dog. It was about standing up when someone tries to take away your peace, your home, or your happiness, and remembering that even one person can make an entire community rise. As I closed the laptop, Max rested his head on my lap, eyes closing peacefully. "Sleep, buddy," I whispered. "You earned it." And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly home.